Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 658 for the 25th of Elul in a regular year. And by way of introduction to today's episode, I'd like to tell you guys about when I first started learning Chassidus back in the day, many years ago. And to me, there were many fascinating things about Chassidus, obviously, but the thing that really stood out to me the most, the thing that really compelled me to want to learn more and intrigued me and was like a very big revelation to me was this emphasis on the physical world, was this emphasis on physicality, and how, while yes, there's this extreme acknowledgement of spirituality and of things that we can't see, things that are beyond our grasp, the souls, the angels, all of that stuff. At the end of the day, it always came back to the physical. And it always was all about how the physical is actually higher than the spiritual, and how there's something about the physical that is really just a lot more profound and a lot more purposeful, and ultimately is where God manifests in an essential way that he does not manifest in any of the more spiritual higher worlds. So this idea really spoke to me. I thought there was something just very fascinating about this, and it's a whole topic in its own right. If you want to explore this further, I would highly recommend studying the famous mimer, the sort of thesis statement of the Rebbe's leadership called Vasi Lagani. This was the last mimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe gave over the previous Lodger Rebbe, and then the first mimer that the Rebbe gave when he sort of it was like him accepting upon himself the leadership of being a Rebbe. And it's just all about this idea about how the really physicality is where it's at. It's the physical world that is really the ultimate purpose of all of creation and what that's all about. So there's so much there. It's very, very cool. And so today we're going to learn about this from a different angle, focusing still on Staka, because Staka again is this kind of overarching theme of this whole entire Sefer of Iggeres HaKodesh. And we've already spoken so much about how this is related to why Staka is such an essential mitzvah, especially when it comes to the physical world and the ultimate purpose of creation. Because Staka, giving, this is the way that we emulate God, because God is ultimately the giver. That's what he is ultimately beyond anything else. Is he's creating the world something from nothing, vitalizing the world, animating the world, all through the trait of chesed. So when we do chesed, when we give tzedakah, when we give charity, when we do acts of kindness, this is our way of emulating God. And so what we're going to be focusing on today is the concept of the revelation of godliness, specifically to those people who are known as Tzaddikim, as very righteous people. And as we'll learn, all Jews are actually in this category. We're all called righteous people. And how this revelation, comparing it in the two levels, that there's a certain revelation that happens in Gan Eden, otherwise known as heaven, we can say, sort of in the more spiritual realms. And then there's a certain revelation that's going to come in the future times with the resurrection of the dead, when all the souls are going to come back down here into the physical world. And how really these two revelations are incomparable, and how the second one is so much greater, so much more profound. And the way that we're going to relate this to tzedakah is we're going to learn about how tzedakah is actually this receptacle to be able to expand the kind of vessel for this future revelation to come, to kind of prepare the world for this revelation to happen. And to be more specific, what is this revelation going to be about? So for the souls in the spiritual realms, in Gan Eden, in those higher realms, their pleasure, their revelation that they derive is really intellectual in nature. It's where they're really basking in a true understanding of things based on the Torah learning and the different deeds that they were involved with on earth, then after these souls pass away, it's like now they can truly comprehend those things that were sort of like not quite graspable to them intellectually down here. But what happens in the future to come, in the future world, in the resurrection of the dead, is they're going to experience these things not only on an intellectual level, but it's actually going to be tangible. It's actually going to be real. So it's like, imagine for a second if like you spent your whole life studying music theory, and imagine that you just learned all of the intricacies of music theory, all the scales, all the notes, all the rhythms, the cadences, all the different styles of music. You were really a musical expert, but sadly, you never actually heard music. Imagine that this was like your whole entire life. Beethoven had a taste of this when he went deaf, which is really crazy, but at least he did experience actual music at some point in his life before that. But imagine if you never actually experienced it in your life, but you really were this like musical expert on a theoretical level. And then imagine that you finally got to actually hear music. Just imagine what a difference that experience would be, right? It's like, it's kind of incomparable. And that's kind of how we can think about this difference between the spiritual experience that the souls have in these higher realms, which is still, while it's really deep and we don't want to diminish and take away from that, it's still very theoretical, versus here in the physical world, in the time of the resurrection of the dead, it's going to be tangible. It's going to be real. It's going to be something sensed in a sensory, actual way. And again, the way that we prepare the world for that state of tangibility and that state of experience is through giving tzedakah. So let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this, and then we can take it from there. So again, for context, we're in the middle of Epistle 17, and just for context, yesterday we were just talking about this idea of how giving tzedakah is such an amazing financial investment, because it's something that really translates, and it's like we get rewards for it here in this world, in our world currently, in our physical world, and it rolls over into a much greater degree into the world to come. And so in this sense, it does get a little bit confusing, but when we say the world to come, it can have two meanings. It can mean Gan Eden, like after, heaven, basically, known colloquially as heaven, or it can mean the future to come when there's the resurrection of the dead. So yesterday we learned about it in terms of the world to come, meaning heaven. So there's sort of three categories to keep in mind here. There's our world as we know it right now, here, our physical existence right now, me and you talking right now. Then there's the world of the souls, which is where people go after they pass away. And then there's the future world to come, which is back down here in this physical world with the resurrection of the dead. So going back to this whole discussion. So when we were talking about this world to come in the Gan Eden sense, and the place that the souls go after they pass away, the Alter Rebbe begins, and he says that the way that this world to come is described by the sages is it's described as that they have the souls there have a crown over their head, and they enjoy the presence of the Shekhinah. That's the way that it's described. So this is in Masachet Brachot in page 17a, that the way that giving this illustration of these souls is they're sitting around, they have crowns on their head, and they're enjoying the Shekhinah, the presence of the Shekhinah. So we're going to examine this a little bit. So why a crown? Like what does that mean? What are these crowns that they're wearing? So a crown is something that surrounds and encircles, right? And in Hebrew, the word crown comes from the word koteret, which koteret is a capital which crowns a column. So if you know there's like Greek columns and then they have a capital on top, that's called a koteret, which is related to the word keter, which is a crown. So it's like, again, this idea of surrounding. It's surrounding it. So why is it surrounding it? What's that about? So the sphere of keter, there's a lot to talk about with the sphere of Keter, but one way of understanding the sphere of Keter is the sphere of Keter is the very, very, very highest sphere. We've talked about Chochmah being the highest one. Keter is even higher than that. So not to confuse you guys too much, but when we've had that outline of the spheros, the 10 spheros, and it might be helpful for you guys to like keep that on hand as we're learning this kind of stuff. We've often described the spheros as starting with Chochmah. We started with the Chochmah, Bina, Das. Those are the three intellectual spheros. Then we have the emotive attributes, the emotive spheros, and those are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, and Malchus, right? So that's how the spheros are often explained in that way. But sometimes there's another map that's given of the spheres where das is missing, actually. And instead of das, we have keter. Keter is in that, and in that map, keter is actually above chokhmah. So it would be keter, chokhmah, bina, and then you would have the emotive spheres of chesed, gvura, tiferet, netzach, hod, yesod, and malchus. Why this is just it depends kind of on your vantage point. So there's a lot to say here, but like kind of like in brief, it's like keter is associated with will, with desire, with wanting something, and das is associated with the internalization of your will, the internalization of what you know and all of that stuff. So it kind of just depends on your orientation, which one you're focusing on. So for today, we're focusing on this keter place. This keter, which again is associated with will, it's associated with desire, pleasure. There's all of those things going on there. And it's not quite present within the body. Like when we look at the spheres in an anthropomorphic sense, like sometimes we look at it as in the illustration of a man. We know chokhmah is the right side of the brain, bina is the left side of the brain, das is often the throat, and that kind of thing. Keter is above the mind. It's above the brain. It's the supra consciousness kind of area. So going back to our text, what the Alter Rebbe explains here in terms of the spheres keter and what he focuses on is he says that keter is an intermediary which connects the radiance of the emanator, blessed be he, the infinite emanator, meaning God, to the emanated beings in the world of Atzilus. So if we go into that world of Atzilus, so if you've been following along, the world of Atzilus is the highest of all the four worlds, and it's the world. It's like a world, but it's a funny kind of world because it's not really something separate from God, which the other worlds are. Its whole experience is that it is nullified within the essence of God. And so nevertheless, within that world of Atzilus, you have the emanator, and then you have those things which are being emanated. So it's like if you wanted to think about like the sun and the rays of the sun. So it's while the rays of the sun are very much aware and they're very much nullified to the sun itself, nevertheless, there is the sun and then there's the sunlight, the rays. So the thing that mediates between these two things in the world of Atzilus is this attribute, is the sphere of keter. And so in the context of our discussion, the way that we can understand it is that remember, we're talking about Gan Eden, we're talking about the souls in heaven in Gan Eden, and we're talking about how they sit and they have these crowns on their head. And what is this crown about? This crown is the mediator that allows them to experience godliness. It's the intermediary between the God and this like infinite revelation of God and them, who are these emanated beings. So it mediates between these two things. But then what will happen is that in the future to come, in the time of the resurrection of the dead, then this light will become revealed down here in our physical world to those tzaddikim that become resurrected. And then in brackets, the Alter Rebbe says, and this is a quote from Yeshayahu, chapter 60, verse 21, Ve'amech kulam tzaddikim chule, that your people are all righteous. So meaning to say all Jews fall into this category of being these righteous people that are going to experience this revelation of God down here in this physical world. So it's not going to be just a spiritual experience anymore that's mediated through these crowns, but actually it's going to be something that we experience in a tangible way down here in this physical world. And then the Alter Rebbe continues, and he says that this could explain the teaching from the Gemara in Bava Basra, page 75b, Atitim tzadikim sheyomru lifneim kadosh. In the future, the righteous will be lauded as holy. So what does that mean, says the Alter Rebbe? So the word holy, which again, this is where Hebrew English translations are really lacking, because we have a certain connotation in our head when we think of the word holy. The word in Hebrew is kadosh, and the word in Hebrew kadosh is there's a lot more to it. And one of the aspects of what kadosh means is it's the aspect of being separate, meaning that it's not something that can actually be comprehended and known in a for real, because it's above intellect, it's above chokhmah, and it's above das that is in Gan Eden. So it's something that is really above, like again, that keter aspect that we've been talking about. And so it's super rational. And as it explains in scripture, and this is a citation from Eov chapter 28 verse 12, "HaChochma me'ayin timatze," k'tiv. So there's different ways we can translate that phrase. One simple translation is, from where do we find chochma, me'ayin? Where do we find chochma? Ayin also means nothingness. So we can say chochma comes from ayin. So what does that mean, that it comes from ayin, comes from nothingness? It's the ayin is this supernal keter, the supernal attribute of the crown, the keter, which is called the ayin in the Zohar HaKodesh. It's called the nothingness, like the void, maybe we can think of it as. So meaning to say that it's like, because once we get into, like, kind of to explain this logically, once we start even in the realm of chokhmah, even though we've described chokhmah as like this intuitive state, this initial spark of intellect that's not super tangible and we can't really elucidate it or that kind of thing, it's still something. It's still a thing that's like in the mind, right? But what's above that is the keter. Keter is something that is beyond any kind of tangibility at all, at least on an intellectual level. It's super rational. It's not something that we can really be grasped intellectually, which is why, again, when we picture this image of these souls in Gan Eden, where the Gan Eden is all about intellectual pleasure and intellectual awareness and radiance and all that stuff, they have to wear these crowns, because the crowns is like sort of like the mediator. Again, it's that vessel that's needed in order for them to experience this radiance, which is above intellect. But when will this radiance really be revealed in a way that isn't in need of this like mediation, really? That's going to be specifically, and perhaps kind of like surprisingly, when the souls come down here and become vested within the bodies in a pure and clear body in the time of the resurrection of the dead. And the Alter Rebbe explains this by bringing up the teaching from Sefer Yetzirah, a very famous Kabbalistic book, Ki na'utz tchilatan b'sofan. Their beginning is wedged in the end, specifically. So meaning to say that, and also there's another teaching, of very famous teaching in Judaism, Sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila chulei. The final deed was in the first thought. So meaning that there's this idea of the final deed being like there's the beginning and the end are wedged together. So we start with the physical world, right? We all start here out in the physical world, and then we pass away eventually in Gan Eden, and then we come back here to the physical world. So the beginning and the end are connected. But, says the Alter Rebbe, we can't get to this level until first we're in Gan Eden, until first a person is in Gan Eden. So first they have to pass through. It's like you can't skip steps. First, you need that intellectual level. You need that level of understanding things on a supernal chokhmah level, each person according to their level. And then we see that there's a teaching from the Gemara in Masechet Ketubot, page 111b, Tal Torah mechayehu, that the dew of Torah revives him. So this Torah that they're learning in Gan Eden is actually going to vivify them and is actually going to give them this ability to be able to be resurrected in the future. And then there's a citation here that the Alter Rebbe brings from Mishlei, chapter 6, verse 22, Vakitzota hi tesichecha chulei. When you awaken, the Torah will cause you to speak. And this is sufficient for the understanding, says the Alter Rebbe. So the basic idea is that this learning Torah is like, we shouldn't minimize it. Like when we say like, okay, they're just learning it, but they're not really grasping it in the fullest sense because they need these crowns or whatever. It's just an intellectual thing. It's like, again, going back to the music theory example, it's like, what's the good of music theory if you can't actually hear the music? No, the music theory, the more you learn about music, the more you know about the intricacies of music, the more you're going to appreciate that music when you eventually hear it, right? It's going to kind of give you that vessel for the music. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.